YouTube channel. I'm gonna do a what's for dinner tonight. I am making a sausage, green bean, and rice crock pot meal. The rice won't be in the crock pot, but everything else will. And I am going to start getting things cut up and cans drained, and I will show you my process of putting this together and let you guys know what we think of this meal. So I'm going to start out by cutting up my sausage into thin slices, and then I'm going to cut up my onion and throw that in the bottom of the crock pot, and then cut up my potatoes and sausage. I am going to fry up in my frying pan on the stove, and then I will end up throwing everything into my crock pot on low. I don't have a 4 to 6 hour timer on there, but I'll put it on for about 8 hours and then check it before that time. So at this part, I start chopping up my sausage into thin slices, and I cut that up until I'm ready to throw it in the pan. So right here, I am frying up my sausages just until they get a little brown, and then they'll be ready for the crock pot. So now I'm cutting up my onion and dicing it into small pieces, not too small, just enough that they're not big giant chunks, and then I throw them in the crock pot. Now I am quartering my potatoes. I don't want the pieces to be too big, but I also don't want them to be too small because you don't want mushy potatoes in your crock pot. And I decided to swap out the rice for the potatoes, and I'm glad I did. It was a really good meal. It was hearty and it had a lot of flavor and it was delicious. So here I'm putting some butter in my pan. I'm getting ready to saute my garlic. And to saute your garlic, you don't have to have it in there for too long. You don't want it to burn, so you just leave it in there until it gets a little bit of a brown on it, and then it's ready to go. Here I'm putting my garlic into the crock pot, spreading it over my potatoes and onions. So next I'm adding 3 cans of drained green beans into the crock pot, just pour them right in over the potato and onion mixture. So next I pour 1 pack of onion soup mix over the green beans, and you just add it all in there. And then after that you add in a cup of chicken broth to that mixture. And after the cup of chicken broth is added, you add in your sausage to the top of that. Then once you're done, you're going to set it to low and let it cook for about 4 to 6 hours in the crock pot. Mine had to cook a little bit longer because the potatoes weren't quite soft enough just yet. So just depending on your crock pot and how long you want your potatoes to be cooked, that'll be about your temperature that you'll be doing. And it turned out so good. I have a video clip of my husband trying it that I'm adding in here, and you guys will see his reaction as well. So what do you think of the food?
It's good.
What does it taste like?
It's got a variety of flavors.
Hello, on tonight's What's for Dinner, I'm going to make a beef stew with some vegetables, and I am going to show you how to do that. Let's get to it. So I'm going to chop up my carrots and make them into little round, about 1/2 inch pieces maybe, and that way they can go into the stew and cook up throughout the day when they're in there. Not too thin because then they'll be mushy, and I'm not a big fan of mushy carrots, but if you want your carrots to be mushier, then you can cut them into thinner pieces. I like to leave mine a little bit thicker so that way they're not too smushy in the end. Then I cut up about the equivalent of 5 to 6 russet potatoes, and these are baby potatoes, so I cut them into quarters, and once they were all cut up, I put the carrots and the potatoes into the crock pot to put the stew together. Here I put some flour and pepper on a plate. It was about 1/4 cup of flour, and then I coated all of the little pieces of stew meat in some flour before I saute it in a pan. I just wanted to make sure all the sides got a little bit of flour on them just to give them a little bit of coating so that they brown nice and evenly all around and give them a little bit more of a flavor to them. Here I warmed up some olive oil, about a couple, 2 to 3 tablespoons of oil on the bottom of the pan, and I'm adding my stew meat in to brown it up around all sides. It doesn't have to be all the way cooked through because in the crock pot it will cook the rest of the way through, just enough to get it started and get it a nice coating on the outside and give it some flavor. And then after that you'll add it to the crock pot. And here I am flipping it around to get all sides a little sear in the pan so that way it seals in that flavor in the meat, and the meat will be nice and tender when you take it out of the crock pot and eat it as a stew. Here I am adding some onion powder, just sprinkling a little bit over the meat, and I'm going to add in some garlic powder as well and sprinkle that over. I just sprinkle over as much as what tastes good to me and my husband. We like garlic powder, so I use a little bit more than everything else, but then I add some Montreal steak seasoning to it, and I add just a little bit of that. A little bit of that seasoning goes a long way, and it's very good. It adds some really nice rich flavors to the meal. Then I use my tongs and I flip the meat around and mix it around a little bit to get some of the seasoning around all the other pieces of the meat that didn't necessarily get it when I sprinkled it on, and let it cook for just a little bit longer with the seasonings in it to let the flavors come out of the seasonings. So as the meat gets ready, I end up folding a paper towel and putting that on a plate, and then I take it out and drain off some of the excess oil onto a paper towel, and I am going to get the second batch of meat into the frying pan and cook that up the same way I did with the first set of meat there. And once it's all ready, I will throw it into the crock pot with all of the vegetables. the meat is cooked, I use the oil and a little bit extra butter to make a roux for a gravy base for the sauce mixture in the stew. So I melt the butter down and I add in some flour. So I use the gold medal Wandra flour. It is really good for making gravies because it's a finer flour. And I use about probably 3 to 4 tablespoons of the flour and then mix it in with the butter to make a really good roux and let it brown up just a little bit. And while it browns, I add in some pepper for flavor. And I add in some Montreal steak as well, and just a little bit because, like I said before, a little bit of Montreal steak goes a long way. It gets a little too salty if you use too much. And then I add some garlic powder to it as well. Me and my husband love garlic, so we add that to everything. And some onion powder just to flavor it up. And here I'm adding some beef broth to my roux to make the gravy-like mixture. I don't want it to be too thick because cooking in the crock pot for hours at a time, it gets really thick if you make it really thick to start out with. So I end up using the full container of beef broth, but I slowly add it in a little bit at a time to make it more of a slightly thicker consistency than just the broth. And I add some flour in to give it that consistency that I like until it's not too thick but not too thin. It's just right. So to get this stew put together, I add my green beans to my crock pot. I did through 2 cans this time. And then I will add in my carrots and potatoes next. And next I'm going to add my stew meat to the crock pot and get all of it in there. As you can tell, it's not fully cooked through, but as it cooks throughout the day, it will cook all the way through. And then I'm going to add my gravy to my crock pot. It's not quite as thick as a true gravy, but thicker than a broth. Then I mixed everything together until everything was well incorporated. The vegetables and the meat and the gravy were all nicely coated and mixed together. Then I started my crock pot and set it to low for 8 hours. And I let it cook for, I believe it was just about 8 hours. I got this going first thing in the morning. If you want it to be ready sooner, you can set it for high for a lesser amount of time, whatever works best for you. This meal was delicious. We made some rolls to go with the side.